Israeli forces have surrounded several hospitals in northern Gaza. The biggest, Al-Shifa, says it has run out of fuel and is now closed to new patients. The Israeli military says this video shows its soldiers placing 300 liters of fuel near Al-Shifa. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says Hamas refused to accept the fuel. The hospital director has denied that and said the fuel would not have been enough to power hospital generators for even an hour. The World Health Organization has described the situation at Al-Shifa as dire and perilous. It says the hospital is unable to function due to fighting nearby, and the number of patient deaths has increased significantly.
The Israel-Hamas battle intensified around hospitals in northern Gaza, making conditions desperate for the medical centers running out of essential supplies and electricity. Samira Al-Khor's displaced family fled the Al-Shifa hospital with her children. She described her experience at the city's major health facility.
We thought the hospital was safe, but it wasn't. If we had stayed another 5 minutes, we would have been killed. They started to bomb us, and we ran away from Al-Shifa. My son got injured, so I left him there in the hospital to get treatment. I couldn't take him with me. I was tired and afraid. I went to my nephew and told him to stay with my son, and then we fled.
Several thousand displaced people have sought shelter in hospitals. Medical staff say hundreds of patients are at risk, including several newborn babies in incubators. In an interview with DW, the UN's World Health Organization expressed alarm at the situation.
We understand there are still 600 to 650 inpatients at Al-Shifa and between 200 and 500 health workers. There are 45 patients who really need kidney dialysis, but they can't get it because the power's run out and the dialysis machine's not working. We're certainly hearing that the health workers don't feel they can leave, that they don't feel they can leave safely, although many are also saying they want to stay because they've got so many vulnerable patients that can't be moved as well.
The Israeli military says its operation is against Hamas. It says the Islamist militant group responsible for the October 7th terror attacks on Israel has a command post inside and under the hospital compound. The Israel Defense Forces denied that the hospital was under siege and agreed to help evacuate babies from Gaza's main hospital, Al-Shifa. Although Samira has managed to flee, aid organizations say that Israel's instructions to leave the hospital without any safe haven make it unfair and impossible to evacuate, especially for the sick and vulnerable patients trapped inside.
For more, let's bring in Shaina Low. She works for the Norwegian Refugee Council and is monitoring developments from Jerusalem. Welcome back to DW News. We hear there are thousands of people taking shelter in Gaza's hospitals. How much medical care can hospitals actually provide given these kinds of conditions?
You know, day by day, the situation in Gaza's hospitals are getting worse. Many of the hospitals have shut down services completely or are operating with very little resources. We are hearing reports of doctors running out of medicine, running out of fuel, shortages of food, clean water. We had a colleague over a week ago had to go and find food for his injured cousins at a hospital in the middle area, which is ostensibly a bit safer. And it took him about 2 hours just to find some biscuits so that the cousin could take some medication that required food. Doctors and medical personnel are working under the most difficult of circumstances, trying to save lives and struggling to do so. It's our responsibility as the international community. It's Israel's responsibility as the occupying power controlling Gaza to provide assistance, including medical supplies and medicines, in order to prevent unnecessary death and injury.
And just to make clear for our viewers, how is your organization able to stay in touch with people in Gaza? Are you able to speak to staff there?
We are still in touch with most of our staff on a daily basis. We are finding that our daily headcounts, trying to make sure that all of our staff is accounted for, are getting more and more difficult as communications become less and less reliable. We had one colleague, Yusuf, told me yesterday that another one of his colleagues tried to call 100 times before he was able to get through, as telecommunications system in Gaza is extremely weakened. We've heard reports from the major telecom companies just in the last couple of days that they anticipate that with running out of fuel, they will soon have even more difficulty keeping their operations running.
Okay, so major communication difficulties on top of everything else going on. I want to ask you about something else we've mentioned earlier in the show. Israel's military says it has placed 300 liters of fuel outside the Al-Shifa hospital, but that Hamas has then blocked the delivery. The hospital director has strongly denied that. What is your organization hearing regarding the delivery of fuel there?
You know, we don't have any folks at Al-Shifa any longer, so it's very difficult for us to make determinations in the fog of war and with competing narratives. I'm not really comfortable speculating on what in fact is going on, but it's the responsibility of all parties to ensure that international humanitarian law is abided by, and we implore that all parties are doing all that they can to save the lives of innocent civilians who are just caught in the crossfire.
And what about fuel needs and deliveries more generally? Can you give us a sense of what the situation is and how much is actually available for hospitals to operate?
You know, the situation with fuel it's something we've been warning about for weeks as fuel supplies have run out. I know that a number of hospitals have had to shut down due to lack of fuel. It's not just the hospitals, it's also in terms of us being able to provide humanitarian response and our partners being able to provide a humanitarian response. Without fuel getting into Gaza, it makes it impossible for trucks to be able to go and deliver aid across Gaza. And so we desperately need fuel to be coming in, not just to run the generators in hospitals, but to run ovens in bakeries, to water desalination plants, water pumps, and of course to be able to distribute aid. So while we've seen a trickle of aid trucks coming in, there's been no fuel entering Gaza for over a month. It's desperately needed, and we call on the international community to continue to push to allow for fuel to go in order to save lives and provide the assistance that people are so desperately in need of.
Shaina, thank you very much for speaking with us. That is Shaina Low with the Norwegian Refugee Council. And earlier, our correspondent in Jerusalem, Rebecca Ritters, told me more about what we have heard from Israel on the situation in Gaza's hospitals.
Israel is saying that it's not targeting civilians, that it's trying to crack down on this Hamas command center that it says is underneath the hospital. We know that gun battles have been going on outside the hospital, making it almost impossible for people to leave. We've been hearing accounts of people trying to leave the hospital, being shot at and having to run back, sometimes then injured even further. So the situation for civilians on the ground, really, really difficult. Israel is saying for people to get out of the hospital, but these gun battles are making it almost impossible, as I said. And we are seeing that Israel are saying that they want to open up, that they have opened up, in fact, on the eastern side of the hospital, an escape route, an evacuation route. But people just too scared. Medical staff saying that people are too sick, too injured to be able to be moved. So the situation just increasingly difficult. We know that the death toll that the Ministry of Health, the Hamas-led Ministry of Health releases hasn't been updated since Friday because they simply can't get a handle on the toll anymore. They're not able to get to places to see who has been killed in strikes and who has been killed in these gun battles. So, the situation there, shocking. Israel saying it's trying to give fuel to the hospital, but we're seeing that Hamas has apparently rejected that offer and saying that it's not nearly enough to be able to operate the hospital, as you just heard in that report. Israel also offering to evacuate babies, but we haven't seen any progress on that yet.
Now, Rebecca, looking at southern Gaza, the Rafah border crossing to Egypt, that's the only crossing out of Gaza not controlled by Israel. We understand that reopened on Sunday, and a few hundred people managed to get out. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, we had confirmation from the people who run the border, the authority there, saying that more than 800 people were able to get out yesterday. This has been after a few days, or several days of it being closed again, after it had reopened in the more initial stages of the bombardment. And we saw a few thousand people coming out. It's thought that around a little less than 3,000, a little fewer than 3,000 people have managed to cross in total, and it's hoped that more people will be able to continue crossing that border. We're talking about mainly foreign nationals, though some Palestinians who have been severely injured or that are suffering really serious health concerns have also been able to cross, though in fewer numbers. And there's obviously hope that more people will be able to cross soon, but we have seen that border crossing then closed. It opened, then it closed again, and now it's seeing reopen. So people hopeful that that will continue and more people will be able to evacuate.
And looking elsewhere, I also understand there were intensified clashes on the Israeli-Lebanese border on Sunday. How serious is the situation there?
Very serious, Claire. Serious and getting more increasingly tense. We heard from Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah a couple of days ago, a similar speech to one he gave, a week ago or so, and not very content-filled, trying to, I think, say that they're keeping up the pressure. And yesterday we saw some of that pressure. We saw another 2 strikes, at least, where we saw more than 20 people injured on the Israeli side. The Hezbollah claiming responsibility for those attacks, and now Israel stepping up its counterattacks on targets inside southern Lebanon. These have been increasing. We've been seeing this tit-for-tat cross-border fire since the beginning of this conflict, and everybody, all the international community, US President Joe Biden here to try and stop, not at the moment, but has visited, and all these other people trying to visit to stop that becoming a wider regional conflict. But of course, it is getting really tense up there, and Hassan Nasrallah saying he's going to be keeping up the pressure on Israel, if only not perhaps wanting to get really involved and really start a bit broader conflict, but to try and keep Israeli troops busy and keep their resources tied up in the north.
Our correspondent Rebecca Ritters in Jerusalem. Thank you so much for that update. And Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has again dismissed calls for a ceasefire unless it includes the release of all the nearly 240 hostages captured by Hamas on October 7th. Now, Netanyahu told U.S. media that Hamas was to blame for the situation in Gaza.
And I think every civilian death, every dead baby is a tragedy. But that tragedy should be placed squarely at the responsibility of Hamas, that is keeping its military installations inside hospitals, its command posts inside hospitals, inside schools, inside UNRWA, UN facilities, and so on.
Let's bring in military analyst Frank Ledwidge on this issue. Frank, good to see you again. Israel has there alleged that Hamas has command posts in and underneath hospitals in Gaza. Is there evidence for this?
Well, good morning, Claire. I think it's worth remembering that if you're a pretty ruthless Islamist terror group, there's no better place to put your headquarters or military positions than hospitals. But there we are. In terms of evidence, the Israelis have been looking at this for decades now, probably about 20 years. They will have 20 years worth of interrogation reports, technical surveillance, satellite surveillance, aerial surveillance, agents on the ground who will be reporting on this. And if you look at the quality of the information provided you accept it's in good faith, I don't think there's any reason for it not to be. It does seem that indeed Hamas has placed some of its major installations underneath that hospital.
Now, over the past few days, I've been speaking to many doctors in Gaza, also to aid workers who have staff there, and no one has mentioned or confirmed the existence of any kind of Hamas command centers in these facilities. Do you think it is conceivable that Hamas could be operating there without anybody realizing it?
Well, with all due respect, and to be blunt about it, I would invite you to consider the consequences for anybody stating to the media that there were Hamas installations in such hospitals. This is need-to-know stuff. And just by way of analogy, I lived on a military base for 4 years and only recently found out there was a big nuclear bunker right underneath where I worked. I didn't need to know it was there. The hospital workers certainly don't need to know it's there. This is just a reality of the situation. However, I did speak to someone worked there for quite a long time in Gaza who said it was a common supposition, but that, of course, is rumour and it's not in any way intelligence. But these things are simply not known to most people, although I think, as I said before, the Israelis have some pretty solid information on it.
So do you expect Israeli troops to attempt to enter Al-Shifa hospital at some point as part of their military operation?
I would suspect it's the very last thing they want to do for very obvious reasons, but this will be a major target, and I would expect them to deal with it somehow. They can be pretty inventive in their operations, the Israeli Defense Forces, but if it has to come to it, they will do so. Although I don't foresee firefights in the hospital. Worth remembering, by the way, that the last holdout of the Islamic State in Raqqa was indeed Raqqa Central Hospital, so Hamas won't mind doing it.
Well, thank you so much for speaking with us, as always. That's military analyst Frank Ledwidge.
Thank you, Claire.